All right, welcome. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, what do you currently do, and maybe a little bit of your background?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Morgan Olmos. I am a UX researcher for NetSuite, which is owned by Oracle. I've been in this role for 9 months now, and my background, this is actually my first legitimate full-time role in UX. Prior to that, I was doing freelance, but not necessarily as a UX researcher. I was doing more like market research. I used to do search engine marketing, which is a whole other story. But yeah, my background actually began in illustration, which has nothing really to do with what I do today. And then I continued to pursue my education, and I actually did a master's in Spanish education, which also doesn't have anything directly to do with UA.
That's awesome. So you have a master's in Spanish education, um, and you mentioned you were doing some search engine optimization. How did you can you remember the first time you heard about UX, right? Like how did you come across to like finding out what UX is and like what drew you to it, or maybe didn't at the time, right? Like kind of what was your journey from like, getting that master's and the type of marketing work you were doing to figuring out what UX was and ultimately like being in this role that you're in now, right? As like very well-known company.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the first time I heard of UX was in terms of UX UI, and that was actually when I was working in Los Angeles several years ago at a media agency when I was doing search engine optimization and search engine marketing. I had heard that term like thrown around, and I just assumed that meant, oh, like developers, like people who know how to code do UX UI. And of course, I'm like, yeah, that's not even my realm. I'm not even going to pay attention to that. It wasn't until actually I left that agency and I started to freelance on my own that I was, just educating myself, trying to keep my skills up to date, especially as a freelancer. You're kind of like responsible for doing that. And I came across this book that I was reading called Designing Your Life. And it's actually written by UX professors at Stanford. And they were talking about how you could apply like the design thinking process to like your personal life. And that's how I was introduced to design thinking and how that relates to UX, and that UX wasn't just for coders. And so I was super intrigued, and actually I applied it to my life, which actually caused me to like research even further and like think, oh wait, like UX research is something that is like a job, something I could do, and something that really interests me. So ironically, like by kind of applying that design thinking in my professional life, actually what led me to start doing UX research. And from there, I basically did a lot of self-discovery. Before I decided to take like the boot camp route, I was doing a lot of reading and researching through Interaction Design Foundation, um, which, helped a lot, especially like get involved with like a community. And I was like a sponge. I just like was trying to be as proactive as possible and like learning as much as I can and just like volunteering for things I didn't even know I was volunteering for, but it like made me learn so fast. And then when I was like, I really want to do this, and I watched tons of YouTube videos. I met with a lot of people primarily through that foundation, just to ask them firsthand, like, what is it that you do? How did you get here? Why do you like it? What don't you like about it? So that I just really knew what I was getting myself into. And then after that, I was very determined, like, yes, this is what I want to do. And then I learned, okay, what are the steps that it's going to take to get there? And after doing like my first case study, I realized I need to build out more my portfolio. And that's when I decided to take and invest in the bootcamp route.
Nice. I love that it was kind of like a self-help book that like introduced you to UX, right? Like
Yeah.
designing your life sounds, very self-helpy, and that's awesome. I'm gonna have to look up that book. Um, and I love also how you talk just about like the research in itself you did to figure out like what it takes to become, a designer or a researcher and kind of break into tech in this field. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Like, as you were doing research, like, was there like a clear, like three-step process, and I know it's much harder than
Oh.
the three-step process, but
Yeah.
like, what were some of your takeaways of like what it takes to break into tech or to become a UX researcher or to become a UX designer?
When I started doing my own personal, this is before I had a chance to really talk to anyone. I was just reading a ton of articles. There's a lot of YouTube videos there too, like, oh, in the daily life of a UX
Yeah.
designer or UX researcher. And I think that's what also intrigued me too. And I wrote down a lot of questions that I had based on whatever I was reading or watching. And then when I found out that there was an opportunity through IDF, the Interaction Design Foundation, to join a chapter and to participate, it was just I recommend any, not necessarily through IDF, but any way that people can like network. I felt like, and I still feel this way, that UX and people who do UX or involved in UX are very willing to like share their knowledge and like to reach out. And I really love that type of attitude and mentality, is that people, like, nobody acts like an expert per se, and everyone's willing
Yeah.
to help. And that's really what I felt, being like such a newbie. And I was talking to people who had been in this field for, either a few years or 15, 20 years, but they were super willing to like, hey, like, let's talk. Let me, any questions you have. So it was super nice to talk to, we just reach out to like various people, whether that's product designers or UX designers, researchers, and just ask them these questions I had. And then they helped to guide me a little bit more specifically, like, okay, if this is this type of niche or like research is what you're more interested in, I recommend you do this or this. And then I basically from there understood that I needed to really develop a portfolio. Actually, being part of IDF, I had an opportunity to work with a UX designer and product designer who had they actually had also transitioned into this field from other careers, but they had been working in there for about 3 to 4 years. And I was helping them with like we were having like a portfolio review activity, and nobody wanted to volunteer to like have their portfolio critiques, because
Yeah.
this was specifically meant for like new people trying to transition. And I had just like basic case study, and I was like, okay, sure, I'll volunteer, because I thought this
It's
is
brave.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I also thought, like, this is my opportunity to get free feedback and critiques
Yeah,
from people who are like professionals and already in the
exactly.
field.
Yeah.
So I did that, and one guy who actually came had been in this, like, he's like been in UX for like 20 years, and I was like, oh shoot, like, we have some like a veteran here, and looking at my pitiful case study, but his feedback was super useful. He pointed out things that I was doing well and things that I like could probably work on. So like very constructive criticism, and definitely just more willing, like, hey, like, reach out if you have any other questions about this, or how could you improve on your research? And so it was actually through that experience that I was able to have more confidence and knowing what I needed to improve, and then how I could continue a similar approach for the next case study, because I knew the standard is you should have at least 2 to 3 case studies if you're trying to break into your role. And I was like, all right, I know I gotta get at least one more. So that was kind of I don't know if I answered your question, but
No, you definitely did. Yeah. Yeah. No, this is super helpful. So in terms of timeline, is this when you joined our program? Like like after this is when you joined, you had that one case study, right? Is that
yeah,
right? Yeah.
so I yeah, it was the first case study was definitely, I feel like, really slow for me just because you're learning as you're going through it. But then obviously after the first one, I feel like the pieces come more together. And then, so I had, had this opportunity to have it critiqued. I made the changes and then they reviewed it again. Basically, they kept reviewing it till they felt like, okay, this is a pretty solid case study. And I
Yeah.
was like, okay, great. This is like my model now. And, but I was like, I really feel like I need to do a boot camp because I really need this type of feedback and critique. I need somebody to walk through it with me to like make sure that I'm not putting together the wrong pieces, basically,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
coming back and forth to the drawing board. So that's why I decided to invest and join. When I joined Avocademy, I did already technically have a case study, but Avocademy helped me make, and I was actually able to make 2 more, even though I know with the program we go through one case study. I was also working simultaneously applying the same principles while doing another one. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's not like a requirement, but I was
Yeah.
pushing myself
Yeah.
to do 2. And I felt like those 2 are definitely like the strongest case studies in my portfolio. So it definitely helped to make the investment.
Nice. Um, that's awesome. I think you've touched on some really important things that I just want to highlight. The first one is around feedback, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently actually working with a couple of people via email that have done a program that does not, it's like a peer reviewed program. I'm not going to name the program. And their portfolios are like done, right? They have 4 or 5 projects and there's just like a ton of red flags in it, right? Like
Mm.
they don't look like high quality projects. Like they're using like gray colors for buttons that make them look disabled when they should like, be different. Like there's just like some glaring um red flags that I think as you're learning, like there's so much stuff you're learning, right? Like you're learning a new tool
Mm-hmm.
or you're learning a new methodology, and at the same time you're like solving a problem to like go put into your case study that you may be like, awesome, I learned how to use Figma and I created this screen and I used all of these things, but and like it's something to be proud of for sure. But if you don't have that feedback of somebody like telling you, and it's really hard to tell you guys this, but to be like, this needs a little bit of work, right? Or like, here's what needs to be fixed. Some people end up spending a lot of time, like years and years, like working on their skill without like some real feedback. So I think it's so important that you figure that out early on, right? Like you were
Oh
like, oh, I
yeah.
need somebody to review my work. And you took that opportunity to like have your portfolio critiqued in front of other people, which is very nerve-wracking. But I love that you touched on that because for us, like I even tell people like you don't have to do our program. I know our program is not, even though we're accessible compared to other programs, like I know some people just don't have, $100 some a month or are not able to
Mm-hmm.
finance or like whatever it may be. I tell people like just find a mentor. And I think the second thing you touched on that was super helpful is how nice people are in this field and how open they
Mm-hmm.
are to like just like check your stuff and talk to you about something. And to me, it was quite surprising that people are just like, yeah, like I'll review your stuff or yeah, I'll take a look. And it's just because like the nature of I guess the field is a lot of people transitioning into it, or even people that have been in it for 20 years, right? Like the veteran you mentioned did like their role was not a UX researcher 20 years ago, right? Like those
Yeah.
words didn't
Yeah,
exist.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So they've had to reinvent themselves over the last even 10 years. So I do think like, for anybody listening, if you're doing this on your own, like props to you because it's very hard, but like props to you, and like please find somebody, kind of like Morgan did, to review their stuff, so you're not stuck in that kind of pattern. But I know we're almost at time here. If you had to give somebody that's considering this career a piece of advice, what advice would you give them about changing careers?
I do your due diligence with research. I mean, there's tons of resources online. Like even before I started talking to people firsthand, there is so much to go through on the internet. And then again, going back onto there's a ton of mentors. There's people that I still talk with today, even though now I'm, a working professional in this field. I feel like you never really stop learning. And that's actually another thing that intrigued me about being in UX was that constant, I feel like if you have that natural inquisitive mind, you're going to love and flourish in this field because there is a lot to learn, but you don't need to be an expert. And I know that the imposter syndrome is real, like especially when you're like about to start in your first day, in your first job in UX, you're really like, oh, can I really do this? And the answer is yes. You just need to be really willing to learn. And to do the work, like. But with that being said, I enjoy it, and I always again find the opportunity to reach out to other people. If it's it doesn't always necessarily have to be about the actual like UX principles, but even if it's about like how do I grow in this field, like what are other options and possibilities for me, or how can I apply UX in something else that I'm interested in, like healthcare or finance. There are people and there are resources for you to like find those answers and to really get a better understanding of where you'd like to fit in this industry.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I know that you yourself do some, mentoring, and, you have some groups and things like that. Is there somewhere that the people listening could find you if they have questions? Or I don't know, do you have a website, a LinkedIn, something you'd like to share for the listeners?
Yeah, of course. So it's so embarrassing. I don't even know my like LinkedIn like link by heart, but my name on LinkedIn is Morgan Olmos. And you can please like feel free to reach out to me. That's mostly where I do a lot of just correspondence. Of course, as you mentioned, I do have like a specific Slack channel dedicated to UX research in Avocademy. But yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can reach me on email. I don't mind my personal email, which I don't know if I can like type it on chat or if you want to share it.
Yeah, if you type it on chat here, we'll get it on the descriptions of the different channels.
Okay, so let me just do that, and I'll copy and paste my LinkedIn too. So you can reach me. This is my personal email, and let me get my LinkedIn right here.
Awesome. So yeah, for those of you listening or watching, make sure to check out the description of the episode, and we'll put these different contact methods on there. Once again, thank you, Morgan, for joining us today and sharing your experience and your knowledge with everybody. It was so great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for reaching out and for the opportunity.
Of course.
All right. Bye.